There's a moment in almost every intelligent person's life when they make a deeply uncomfortable discovery. Being understood and being right are not the same thing. You can explain yourself perfectly, choose every word carefully, give someone the context they were missing, show them exactly what happened, correct the misunderstanding, clarify your intention, and somehow the conversation gets worse, so you explain again, longer this time. You send the paragraph, then another paragraph. You rewrite the message before sending it because maybe the first version sounded too cold. You soften the language, you add context, you make sure they know you understand their side, and then you wait for the moment when they finally say, "I understand what you mean now." But sometimes that moment never comes. Instead, they take one sentence from everything you wrote and argue with that, so you clarify that sentence. Now there's another misunderstanding. You correct that one too. And before you realize what's happened, you've spent 40 minutes defending a decision that originally required 10 words. Most people assume the problem is communication. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe I chose the wrong words. Maybe I need a better argument, but there is another possibility, and it's much harder to accept. What if they understood you the first time? What if the problem isn't that they don't understand your explanation, but that accepting your explanation would require them to give up something they don't want to give up? Their position, their leverage, their anger, their image of you, or simply the satisfaction of watching you continue to defend yourself. That changes everything. Because if misunderstanding is always treated as an information problem, your instinct will always be to provide more information. But if the real problem is emotional, social, or psychological, more information may simply give the conflict more material to feed on. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this problem almost 2 centuries before text messages, comment sections, group chats, and social media turned over-explanation into a daily habit. He was fascinated by the uncomfortable distance between reason and human behavior. People possess the ability to reason, but that doesn't mean reason is always driving. Behind the argument can be pride, status, fear, desire, resentment, the need to save face. And perhaps most importantly, the need to protect a conclusion we've already emotionally committed ourselves to. Once you understand that, you start noticing something strange about psychologically strong people. They don't correct every false assumption. They don't answer every accusation. They don't defend every boundary. They don't chase every person who misunderstood them. And they don't need every conversation to end with, "You're right," not because they can't explain themselves, because they've learned something more valuable. They know when explanation has stopped serving understanding. And today I'm going to give you 7 rules for recognizing that exact moment. 7 rules inspired by Schopenhauer's philosophy and connected to what modern psychology tells us about motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, assertiveness, identity, emotional regulation, framing, and human behavior. But there's an important distinction. This isn't about becoming cold. It isn't about ignoring people to manipulate them. And it isn't about pretending you're more intelligent than everyone around you. It's about learning where your explanation is valuable and where your explanation has quietly become a request for permission. And stay with me until Rule 6, because Rule 6 explains one of the strangest things that happens during human disagreement. Sometimes you can give someone better evidence, a clearer explanation, even proof. And instead of weakening their position, they become more committed to it. The reason why has almost nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with identity. And once you recognize that mechanism, some of the most exhausting conversations of your life will suddenly make sense. Before we begin, I want you to write 1 sentence in the comments, not for me, for yourself. I don't need to explain everything. Remember that sentence, because by the end of this video, it's going to mean something very different than it does right now. And Rule 1 begins with the mistake almost every thoughtful person makes. They assume clarity has no limit. It does. Imagine someone asks you why you can't come over Friday night. You answer, "I already have plans." That's a complete answer. But they ask, "What plans?" So you explain. Then they ask, "Can't you change them?" You explain why you can't. They respond, "But this is important." So now you explain that you understand it's important. Then comes, "I would do it for you." And suddenly you're explaining what the friendship means to you. Notice what happened. The conversation began with a simple question. Are you available? 5 minutes later, you're defending your character. Nothing about your original answer required that transformation. But it happened because each new objection convinced you that one more explanation would finally resolve the tension. This is where intelligent and highly conscientious people can become especially vulnerable. If you're good at seeing nuance, you're also good at generating explanations. You can always find another angle, another example, another analogy, another sentence that might finally make everything click, and that's useful when the other person is genuinely trying to understand. But when they are not, your greatest communication strength can become the mechanism that keeps you trapped in the conversation. There is a point where clarification stops being clarification. It becomes negotiation, and there is another point beyond that, where negotiation becomes an audition for approval. That's the line you need to learn to see. Schopenhauer was deeply skeptical of the comforting idea that human disagreement is simply a temporary shortage of reason. Give people enough logic and eventually truth wins. Human behavior isn't that clean. Modern psychology gives us a useful concept here: motivated reasoning. We don't always approach information by asking, what conclusion does the evidence support? Sometimes the mind quietly asks, what interpretation allows me to keep the conclusion I already want? That's an enormous difference. Because if someone is genuinely missing information, information helps. But if someone is protecting a desired conclusion, your explanation may simply become something new they have to defeat. That's why some arguments feel endless. Every answer produces another question. Every clarification creates another objection. Every piece of evidence moves the goalposts, and you walk away thinking, I still haven't explained it properly. Maybe you have. Maybe clarity reached its limit 10 minutes ago. Here's how you test this without becoming cynical. Explain yourself once, clearly, honestly, without aggression. Then watch what the other person does with the information. Do they incorporate your answer? Do they acknowledge any part of it? Does the conversation move forward, or does your answer simply generate a new accusation? That's the distinction. A receptive person may still disagree with you. That's important. Agreement is not the test. Movement is. A healthy conversation moves, maybe slowly, maybe awkwardly, but information changes something. A. Non-receptive conversation circles. You answer question A, they ask B. You answer B, they return to as though you never answered it. Now you answer again with more detail. They jump to C. 20 minutes later, you're defending yourself against 5 different accusations and can't even remember which one started the conversation. That's not clarity, that's a loop. And loops are dangerous because they create the illusion of progress while consuming enormous amounts of attention. So here's the practice for Rule 1. The next time you notice yourself repeating the same explanation in different words, stop and say, I've explained my reasoning. You don't have to agree with it, but I don't have anything else to add. Then tolerate what happens next, because something will happen inside you. Your nervous system will scream, add another sentence. Soften it, make sure they aren't angry. Explain what you meant by saying you have nothing else to add. Don't let the sentence stand. This is your first line to remember. Clarity has a limit, and if you've ever written an enormous paragraph to someone, only to receive a 2-word response that made you want to write an even bigger paragraph, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Hit like if you've been there. Because Rule 2 explains why that second paragraph can completely change the psychological meaning of the first one. 2 people can say exactly the same word and communicate completely different things. No, one person says it and stops, the other says it, then immediately begins explaining. No, but it's just because I've been really busy this week and I don't want you to think I don't care, because normally I would, and maybe I can rearrange something. Same word, different signal. The first no communicates a decision. The second no sounds like the beginning of negotiations. This doesn't mean strong people never explain themselves. That's internet nonsense. Healthy relationships depend on context. People deserve explanations. Mistakes require accountability. Good communication often means explaining yourself in detail. The issue isn't explanation. It's what happens when the explanation is being used to regulate your anxiety about someone else's reaction. That's over-explanation, and there's usually a hidden sentence underneath it. You never say the sentence out loud, but psychologically it's there. Please tell me I'm still a good person after I make this decision. That's why overexplanation often appears around boundaries. Saying no creates discomfort. Disappointing someone creates discomfort. Being seen as selfish creates discomfort. So you try to remove the discomfort with language, more context, more justification, more reassurance. But the irony is brutal. The more desperately you try to make your boundary acceptable, the more negotiable the boundary can begin to appear. You intended your explanation to make the decision stronger. Instead, it communicated uncertainty. And people respond to uncertainty, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. They push once more. Are you sure? And because you've already demonstrated that their disappointment affects you, you explain again. Now the boundary has a door, and they're testing the handle. Here's a simple practice. I call it the one reason rule. Decision. One honest reason when appropriate. Stop. I can't make it tonight. I already have plans. I can't take that extra work this week. My schedule is full. I don't want to continue this conversation while we're both angry. We can talk tomorrow. Notice something about those sentences. They're not hostile. They're not dominant. They're not manipulative. They're simply complete. And completeness is something anxious communication often struggles with. Anxious communication keeps adding one more sentence, one more reassurance, one more emoji, one more apology, one more explanation, not because the other person needs it, because you need evidence that they're not upset. That's a very different purpose. The next time you make a decision someone might dislike, observe yourself immediately after you state it. How many extra sentences do you add? Don't judge yourself, count them 1, 2, 3, 4. Then ask, did those sentences provide necessary information, or were they trying to manage the other person's opinion of me? That question will reveal more about your communication habits than almost any personality test. Your line to remember from Rule 2 is, a decision doesn't need an apology for existing. Sometimes it needs explanation, sometimes compassion, sometimes compromise, but it doesn't need to beg for permission to be real. And this brings us to the hardest part, because maybe you stop explaining, maybe you hold the boundary, maybe you communicate perfectly, and they still decide you're selfish. Cold, arrogant, difficult. What then? Most people immediately reopen the conversation. Psychologically strong people learn a much harder skill. They let someone be wrong about them. And Rule 3 is where this gets uncomfortable. There is a psychological skill that sounds simple until you actually try to practice it. Letting another person hold an inaccurate opinion of you without immediately trying to correct it. Someone thinks you're selfish. Someone thinks you're arrogant. Someone misunderstands why you left. A coworker interprets your silence as weakness. A friend tells themselves you don't care because you finally said no. Someone from your past tells a version of the story where they were completely right. And you were completely wrong, and immediately something inside you wants to intervene. You want to correct the record. You want to explain what really happened. You want to send the message that begins, "That's not what I meant." And sometimes you absolutely should. If a misunderstanding threatens your relationship, your work, your reputation in a meaningful way, or something genuinely important, clarity matters, but sometimes nothing important is at stake. Accept your need to control what another person thinks about you. And that's where the trap begins, because reputation matters deeply to the human brain. For most of human history, belonging to a group wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Being rejected, excluded, or viewed as untrustworthy could carry enormous consequences. So when somebody forms a negative opinion of you, your nervous system doesn't necessarily experience it as one person has an inaccurate interpretation. It can experience it as a threat. Fix it, correct it, restore your position, make them understand, and suddenly, their opinion becomes your assignment. Think about how strange that is. Someone misunderstands you, they go home, maybe they're eating dinner, maybe they're watching television, maybe they've already forgotten half the conversation, but you're lying in bed, rehearsing arguments for a courtroom that exists entirely inside your head. They're no longer doing anything to you. And yet their opinion is still controlling your nervous system. That's the real cost of needing to be understood by everyone. You give other people permanent access to your internal state. Schopenhauer wrote extensively about the enormous influence other people's opinions have over human happiness. And the deeper lesson isn't that reputation means nothing. It clearly matters. The lesson is that there is a difference between protecting a reputation that affects your life and becoming psychologically dependent on universal approval, because universal approval is impossible. Every person you meet constructs a version of you from incomplete information. They see fragments, one conversation, one mistake, one decision, one moment when you were tired, one moment when you were angry, one story someone else told them, and from those fragments, they build a person. But that person isn't you, it's their model of you. And psychologically strong people eventually understand something liberating. You are not responsible for maintaining every model of you that exists inside someone else's mind. Here's the test I want you to use. The next time you feel an overwhelming urge to correct someone's opinion of you, ask, what materially changes if this person continues believing this? Be specific. Does it damage an important relationship? Does it affect your career? Does it create a genuine risk? Does someone you deeply care about deserve context they don't currently have? If yes, speak, explain, clarify. Psychological strength is not silence for the sake of silence. But what if the answer is nothing? Nothing actually changes. I just hate that they think this about me. Then you've discovered the real conflict. The conflict isn't between you and them anymore, it's between you and your need to control their perception. Imagine someone says, you've changed. Your immediate instinct may be, no, I haven't. It's just that lately I've been. Stop. Maybe you have changed. Maybe you've become less available. Maybe you stopped tolerating something you used to tolerate. Maybe you're no longer willing to participate in a dynamic that benefited them. Their statement doesn't automatically require a defense. You could simply ask, what makes you say that? Now something important happens. Instead of defending yourself against a vague judgment, you make them explain the judgment. Maybe they have a legitimate point. Good, now you can learn something. Or maybe their answer is, you don't do everything you used to do for me. Now you learn something completely different. The word changed wasn't necessarily describing your character. It may have been describing their loss of access. That's why immediate self-defense is so dangerous. It prevents you from gathering information. Sometimes the accusation contains data. Let it speak before you attack it. For the next week, when someone makes a judgment about you that triggers the urge to defend yourself, don't immediately explain. Ask one question first. What makes you think that? Then listen, no interruption. No preparing your rebuttal while they are talking. Listen, you may discover that you owe someone an explanation. You may discover that you owe someone an apology, or you may discover that the misunderstanding serves them better than the truth. Either way, you now have information. Your line to remember from Rule 3 is, they are allowed to have an incomplete version of me. That sentence isn't arrogance, it's acceptance, because everybody does. And here's where things become even more interesting. Once you stop correcting every misunderstanding, people sometimes increase the pressure. They provoke, they send another message, they make the accusation sharper, and suddenly silence itself becomes part of the interaction. But silence is one of the most misunderstood ideas in modern psychology content, because silence isn't automatically strength. Sometimes it's fear wearing a sophisticated costume. You've probably seen the advice online, stay silent, don't react, disappear, become mysterious, let them wonder. It sounds powerful, sometimes it is, but there is a problem. Two people can perform exactly the same behavior for completely opposite psychological reasons. Imagine two employees sitting in a meeting. Their manager publicly criticizes both of them unfairly. Neither responds immediately. From the outside, they look identical, but inside the first person. Panic is running the entire system. They desperately want to speak. They know the criticism is unfair, but they're terrified of confrontation, so they freeze. That's not composure, that's inhibition. The second person feels the same initial surge, anger, embarrassment, adrenaline, but they don't respond immediately because they're deciding whether responding now serves their objective. That's different. The first person's silence was chosen by fear. The second person's silence was chosen by judgment. Same behavior, different psychology. This distinction matters enormously, because if you confuse suppression with self-control, you can spend years congratulating yourself for being calm while resentment quietly accumulates underneath. Real emotional regulation doesn't mean feeling nothing. It means the feeling doesn't automatically determine the behavior. Anger can exist without becoming an angry message. Fear can exist without becoming submission. Embarrassment can exist without becoming frantic self-defense. That's strength, not the absence of emotion, the presence of choice. Here's one of the simplest practices in this entire video, and it can completely change the way you handle conflict. When something triggers you, don't answer immediately. Give yourself 3 seconds, not 3 minutes, not 3 hours, 3 seconds. Someone makes a disrespectful comment. Pause. Someone sends a message that makes your stomach tighten. Pause. Someone challenges you in front of other people. Pause, because between stimulus and response, something important has to happen. Your first impulse needs time to become a decision. That gap may be tiny, but psychologically it's enormous. Think about the last message you sent while angry. The one you regretted 10 minutes later. Your intelligence didn't disappear when you wrote it. Your vocabulary didn't disappear. Your ability to reason didn't disappear. What disappeared was the distance between emotion and action. The emotion became the instruction. And that's exactly what the 3-second gap interrupts. Here's the practice. The next time someone says something that immediately activates you, don't decide what to say first. Decide what not to do. Don't interrupt. Don't raise your voice. Don't reach for your phone. Don't send the first sentence your nervous system produces. Breathe once, then ask, what response serves me 30 minutes from now? Not, what response feels satisfying for the next 30 seconds, 30 minutes. That single change in time horizon can completely alter your behavior, because the response that feels powerful immediately is often the response that creates the most damage later, and the response that feels uncomfortable immediately. Silence, a slower voice, a delayed message can become the one you're grateful for later, but there's another side to this. Pausing doesn't mean avoiding. If something needs to be said, say it. The pause exists so that you choose the sentence, instead of the sentence choosing you. Your line to remember from Rule 4 is, a stimulus does not own my response. And once you learn that, something fascinating happens. People who were accustomed to getting an immediate emotional reaction from you may start trying harder. They push another button, then another. They increase the pressure. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. They assume the accusation itself is the thing they need to answer. It often isn't. Sometimes the real trap is hidden inside the way the accusation was framed, and that's Rule 5. Here's a sentence that can trap you before you've even answered it. Why are you so selfish? Most people immediately respond, I'm not selfish, and psychologically, the trap has already worked, because the moment you begin proving that you're not selfish, you've accepted the premise that your selfishness is now the subject under investigation. You're defending yourself inside someone else's frame. This happens constantly. Why are you always so defensive? I'm not defensive. I'm just trying to explain. Now you're explaining why you're not defensive, which can make you appear even more defensive. Why don't you care about this relationship? I do care. Look at everything I've done. Now you're presenting evidence inside a frame that already assumes your lack of care. Why are you afraid to admit I'm right? I'm not afraid. Same mechanism. The accusation doesn't merely contain a claim, it defines the battlefield. And if you answer without examining the frame first, you may spend the next 30 minutes fighting on territory the other person chose for you. Schopenhauer understood this problem exceptionally well. In his writing on argument, he examined how disputes often stop being searches for truth and become contests in which people use rhetorical techniques to protect a position. And one of the most powerful advantages in any argument is controlling the premise from which the argument begins. Modern communication gives us a useful way to think about this: framing. A frame determines what the conversation is supposedly about, and once you accept the frame, every answer you give can reinforce it. So instead of answering, why are you so selfish? Try, what specifically did I do that you believe was selfish? Notice what changed. You didn't attack them. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't accept the label. You moved the conversation from character to behavior. Now they have to identify something concrete. Maybe they can. Maybe you genuinely behaved selfishly. Good. Now there's something real to discuss, but maybe they can't. Maybe the accusation collapses the moment it has to become specific. Either outcome gives you more information than immediate self-defense ever could. Here's the practice for Rule 5. Before defending yourself against an accusation, remove the label and look for the behavior underneath it. You're selfish becomes, what specific behavior are we talking about? You're controlling becomes, what did I specifically try to control? You don't care becomes, what did I do that made you feel uncared for? This does two things. First, it slows the conversation down. Labels are emotionally explosive because they're broad. Behavior is specific, and specific things can actually be examined. Second, it protects you from accepting a false premise simply because you're under pressure. But there's an important warning here. Don't turn this into a rhetorical trick. If 3 different people tell you that you interrupt constantly, don't hide behind, "Give me one specific example." Then dismiss every example individually. That's not psychological strength. That's avoidance with better vocabulary. The purpose of rejecting a false frame is to reach reality, not escape accountability. If the criticism is legitimate, own it fast. There's enormous strength in saying, "You're right, I handled that badly." No essay, no courtroom defense, no "I'm sorry," but just ownership. Because once you stop treating every criticism as a threat to your identity, you become much harder to manipulate with criticism. Think about that carefully. If someone can control you simply by accusing you of being selfish, then all they need to influence your behavior is the word selfish. If the word bad partner terrifies you, someone can use that label to make you tolerate things you otherwise wouldn't. If being called difficult terrifies you, you may agree to things you don't want simply to prove you're easygoing. The label becomes a remote control. The solution isn't to stop caring what anyone thinks. The solution is to separate the accusation from the evidence. Ask what actually happened, then evaluate that. Maybe you were wrong, correct it. Maybe they were wrong, let it stand. Maybe both of you contributed, discuss it. But don't let a vague label force you into an endless defense of your entire character. Your line to remember from Rule 5 is, "I don't defend myself inside a false frame." And now we arrive at the rule I told you about at the beginning, Rule 6, because sometimes you do everything right. You slow the conversation down. You identify the actual claim. You provide evidence, the evidence is clear, and somehow, the other person becomes even more certain that they are right. Why? This is where the argument stops being about information and starts becoming about identity. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You can give someone perfect evidence and make them believe you less, not because the evidence is weak, not because they aren't intelligent, but because accepting the evidence would require them to change something they are psychologically invested in protecting. Their identity, their loyalty, their worldview, their memory of what happened, or the story they tell themselves about who they are. This is where intelligent people often make one of their biggest mistakes. They assume stronger evidence must create stronger persuasion, so when someone rejects the first explanation, they bring more evidence, screenshots, dates, messages, examples, logic. They build an airtight case, and then something confusing happens. The other person doesn't become more open, they become more defensive. Why? Because you may no longer be challenging an idea, you may be challenging an identity. Imagine someone has spent 10 years believing, "I am an excellent judge of character." Then you show them overwhelming evidence that someone they trusted has been lying to them. Accepting your evidence doesn't only mean admitting, "This person lied." It may also mean admitting, "I was wrong about them for years. I ignored warning signs. Other people saw something I didn't. My judgment failed me." Now the psychological cost of accepting the evidence has become much larger. The argument isn't only about facts anymore, it's about self-concept. And human beings are extraordinarily good at protecting self-concept. We reinterpret, we minimize, we selectively remember, we search for exceptions, we attack the messenger. Anything that allows the existing story to survive. This is one reason confirmation bias is so powerful. We naturally notice, remember, and favor information that fits what we already believe more easily than information that threatens it. And the more emotionally important the belief, the more resistance you may encounter. This doesn't mean facts don't matter. They matter enormously. It means facts do not enter an empty mind. They enter a mind already filled with loyalties, fears, memories, incentives, and identity. Schopenhauer understood the deeper problem. An argument can look like a battle over truth, while underneath it, both people may be defending something much more personal. Pride, status, consistency, the need not to lose, and once you recognize that, you stop asking only, "How can I explain this better?" You begin asking a much more important question. What would this person have to psychologically give up in order to agree with me? Sometimes the answer is almost nothing, then conversation can work, but sometimes the answer is their entire image of themselves, and when that's the price of agreement, your next 10 explanations may accomplish less than your first one. This is the moment intelligent people need to recognize. Not every argument is waiting for a better argument. Some arguments are waiting for you to stop participating in them. Here's the practice for Rule 6. When an argument stops moving, don't immediately search for better evidence. Ask yourself, what would this person have to admit if they agreed with me? Maybe they'd have to admit they made a mistake. Maybe they'd have to admit they treated you unfairly. Maybe they'd have to question someone they trust. Maybe they'd have to abandon a belief they've defended publicly for years. Maybe they'd have to admit that the story they've been telling themselves about what happened isn't completely true. Now ask a second question. Are they psychologically ready to pay that price? Because if the answer is no, your next paragraph probably isn't going to change anything. This is where stopping becomes a form of intelligence, not because you've proven you're right, not because you've defeated them, but because you've recognized the point of diminishing returns. Think of an argument like a locked door. If the door is locked because the person doesn't have the right information, information is the key. Give it to them. But if the person is standing on the other side holding the door shut, bringing 20 more keys doesn't solve the problem. That's the distinction. Sometimes people can't understand. Sometimes they don't understand yet. And sometimes understanding would threaten something they are not prepared to surrender. Those are three completely different situations. Intelligent communication means learning to tell them apart. Here's a sentence you can use when you recognize the third one. I think we understand each other's positions. I don't think repeating them is going to change anything. Then stop. Notice how different that is from, fine, you're impossible. The first sentence closes the argument. The second creates a new one. That's psychological strength. You don't need the final insult. You don't need the perfect comeback. You don't need to make them admit defeat before you're allowed to leave the conversation. And this is where many intelligent people struggle. Because being able to construct another argument creates the temptation to use it. You think, I know exactly what I could say next. Maybe you do, but intelligence isn't demonstrated by using every weapon available to you. Sometimes it's demonstrated by recognizing that another shot serves no purpose. Your line to remember from Rule 6 is, not every closed mind needs another open argument. Remember that sentence, because it leads directly to the final rule. And the final rule is where all 6 previous rules become one skill, knowing when enough is enough. There's a point in almost every bad argument where the conversation quietly dies, but both people keep talking. Nothing new is being learned, nothing new is being understood. The same claims are being repeated in slightly different language, and yet neither person wants to stop. Why? Because stopping can feel like losing. If I leave now, maybe they'll think they won if I don't answer that accusation. Maybe they'll believe I couldn't if I let that final message sit there. Maybe they'll assume they're right, so you send one more response, then they send one more, and suddenly you're no longer communicating to understand anything. You're communicating to control the ending. This is where psychological strength becomes restraint. Schopenhauer understood something deeply uncomfortable about human argument. Once vanity becomes involved, truth can become secondary. We don't merely want the correct position. We want the satisfaction of being seen as the person who had the correct position. Those are not the same desire, and the second one can keep an argument alive long after the first one has become impossible. Think about an argument over text. You write a careful response, they answer. You notice 3 things they're wrong about, so you correct all 3. They ignore 2 of your corrections and attack 1 sentence. You defend that sentence. Now they bring up something from 6 months ago. You answer that, an hour later. You are no longer discussing the issue that started the conversation. You're defending your history, your motives, your personality, maybe even your entire character. At some point, intelligence has to ask a different question. Not, what can I say next, but what am I trying to achieve by continuing? That's the question most people never ask. If the goal is understanding still happening? If the goal is solving a problem, is the problem getting closer to being solved? If the goal is setting a boundary, has the boundary already been stated? If the answer is yes, then another paragraph may not be communication. It may simply be your discomfort with leaving something unanswered, and that discomfort can become expensive. It costs time, attention, sleep, focus, sometimes entire days, all because another person left 1 sentence on your screen that your ego believes must be answered. Here's the principle: the last word is not the same thing as the strongest position. Sometimes the strongest position has already been stated. and everything after it only weakens it. If you've made yourself clear, if you've listened, if you've corrected what genuinely needed correcting, and the conversation is now repeating itself, you are allowed to stop, not dramatically, not with a final insult, not with a threat. Simply stop contributing to a conversation that has stopped producing anything useful. Because the ability to continue an argument is not power. The ability to recognize when continuing serves no purpose is. Here's the practice for Rule 7. Before sending another response in a difficult conversation, ask yourself 3 questions. Have I already made my position clear? Has the other person actually introduced anything new? And what exactly will another response accomplish? If you've already explained your position, if nothing new has been introduced, and your only reason for responding is that you can't tolerate leaving their last message unanswered, stop. That's the exit. Not because they won, not because you lost, because the conversation has reached the point where additional words are producing additional heat, but no additional understanding. This is especially difficult over text. Your phone creates the illusion that every message requires a response. It doesn't. A notification is an invitation to engage, not an obligation. Someone can send you 6 paragraphs. You are not legally or psychologically required to produce a 7th. Someone can misunderstand your final sentence. You don't always need to correct the misunderstanding. Someone can end with, "Whatever, I knew you wouldn't understand," and every part of your ego may want to answer. Let it want to, then put the phone down. Because sometimes the final provocation exists for one reason, to reopen a conversation that was already ending. Here's a useful sentence when you do need to close things explicitly. I've said what I needed to say. And I don't think continuing this conversation is productive. That's enough, don't add, but if you want to understand why, you just reopen the door, don't add and another thing, you just walk back through it. Don't send a final paragraph 3 hours later because you suddenly thought of the perfect argument. The conversation was already over. Let it stay over and notice something important. This isn't the silent treatment. The silent treatment uses withdrawal to punish, pressure, or control another person. What we're talking about is different. You communicated. You listened, you stated your position, then you recognized that continuing was no longer useful. One is manipulation, the other is a boundary, and psychologically strong people learn the difference. Your line to remember from Rule 7 is, I don't need the last word to know when I'm finished. Read that again in your own mind. I don't need the last word to know when I'm finished. Because once you can genuinely live that sentence, arguments begin losing their ability to steal entire evenings from you. But there's still one problem. Knowing these 7 rules intellectually is easy. Remembering them when your heart is racing, when your phone lights up, when somebody hits exactly the insecurity they know will make you react, that's different. So before we finish, I want to give you a simple system for turning all 7 rules into one automatic response, something you can actually remember. In the moment, unite it. When you're triggered, you will not remember a 40-minute philosophy lesson. You won't remember every example. You won't remember every psychological mechanism, and that's okay. You only need to remember 7 questions. Before you explain yourself again, ask, am I clarifying or am I trying to force understanding? That's Rule 1. Before adding another paragraph, ask, does this person need more information or do I need more approval? That's Rule 2. When someone misunderstands you, ask, what actually changes if they continue believing this? That's Rule 3. Before reacting emotionally, ask, did I choose this response or did my nervous system choose it for me? That's Rule 4. When someone labels you, ask, what specific behavior exists underneath this accusation? That's Rule 5. When evidence keeps failing, ask, what would this person have to give up psychologically in order to agree with me? That's Rule 6. And before sending one more message, ask, what will this response actually accomplish? That's Rule 7, 7 questions, but underneath all 7 is only one principle. Do not surrender control of your behavior simply because another person created discomfort inside you. That's it, that's the architecture. Because most unnecessary explanations begin with discomfort. Someone doubts you, discomfort. Someone misunderstands you, discomfort. Someone thinks you're selfish, discomfort. Someone leaves an accusation unanswered on your screen, discomfort, and your mind says, make the discomfort disappear. Explain, correct, defend, prove. Respond, but psychological strength begins when you realize something almost embarrassingly simple. Discomfort is not an emergency. You can feel misunderstood and wait. You can feel accused and think. You can feel rejected and still choose your next action carefully. You can know that someone somewhere has the wrong story about you and continue eating your dinner. That may sound small, it isn't. Because the person who cannot tolerate being misunderstood can be controlled by misunderstanding. The person who cannot tolerate disapproval can be controlled by disapproval. The person who cannot tolerate silence can be controlled by silence. And the person who cannot tolerate an unanswered accusation can be controlled by accusation. Your freedom begins exactly where your tolerance for discomfort begins. So here's the reset. When you feel that familiar urge to explain, pause, ask which of the 7 questions applies, answer it honestly, then choose, speak if speaking serves something real, clarify if clarity is possible, apologize if you're wrong, set the boundary if one is needed, walk away if the conversation is finished. But don't keep talking simply because silence makes you uncomfortable. Because sometimes the most intelligent thing you can add to a conversation is nothing. Schopenhauer was not optimistic about human nature, and that's putting it mildly. He believed human beings were driven far less by pure reason than we like to imagine. Desire, ego, vanity, self-interest, the need to preserve our own view of reality. These forces often operate underneath what looks, on the surface, like rational thought, and that's what makes his philosophy so useful for understanding arguments. Because most of us enter conflict with a hidden assumption: if I can just explain this clearly enough, the other person will understand. But that assumes understanding is always the goal. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the other person genuinely wants to know what happened. Sometimes they want context. Sometimes they want to repair the relationship. Those conversations are worth having, but sometimes the real goal is different: to win, to avoid embarrassment, to preserve status, to escape responsibility, to make you admit something, to provoke a reaction, or simply to protect a story they have already decided is true. And when you mistake the second kind of conversation for the first, your intelligence can actually work against you, because intelligent people are often exceptionally good at producing explanations. You can find another example, another analogy, another piece of evidence, another way of phrasing the same point. You think your ability to keep explaining gives you an advantage, but sometimes it only gives the argument more fuel. This is one of the paradoxes at the center of psychological strength. Your intelligence is not measured only by how much complexity you can produce. It is also measured by how quickly you can recognize when complexity is unnecessary. A child can ask why forever. At some point, the smartest answer is not another answer. It's recognizing that the question is no longer searching for information. And adults do sophisticated versions of the same thing. Why did you do that? You explain. But why didn't you do this? You explain. But if you really cared, why would you? And suddenly you're 10 explanations deep, trying to satisfy a standard that moves every time you approach it. This is why the 7 rules matter. They don't teach you to become silent. They teach you to become selective. Selective with your explanations. Selective with your attention. Selective with your emotional reactions. Selective with the arguments you enter. And especially selective with the people who receive unlimited access to your energy. That's a very different philosophy from never explain yourself. Sometimes you should explain yourself. Sometimes you owe an explanation. Sometimes refusing to explain is cowardice. But wisdom is knowing the difference between an explanation that creates understanding and an explanation that merely feeds a loop. Schopenhauer's deeper warning was never that reason is useless. It was that reason becomes dangerous when ego secretly takes control of it. Because once ego is driving, even intelligence can become a servant of foolishness. And that's why the strongest person in an argument is not necessarily the person with the best comeback. Sometimes it's the first person who realizes there is nothing left worth winning. Think of one conversation you still replay in your head. Maybe it happened yesterday, maybe 6 months ago, maybe years ago. You know the one, the conversation where you walked away and 20 minutes later thought of the perfect sentence. The sentence that would have explained everything. The sentence that would have made them understand. The sentence that would have finally proven that you weren't the person they accused you of being. And your mind still returns to it, rewriting it, editing it. Imagining a different ending, but ask yourself something uncomfortable. If you could go back and deliver that perfect sentence, would it actually have changed them, or would it simply have produced another argument? That's the question, because sometimes we don't replay conversations because there was something left to solve. We replay them because our ego hates an ending it didn't control. We wanted recognition. We wanted the apology. We wanted them to say, "You're right. I misunderstood you." And when that moment never arrived, our mind kept the courtroom open. Day after day, sometimes for years, you become the lawyer, the witness, the judge, and strangely, the other person doesn't even need to be present anymore. You're arguing with a memory. This is where the 7 rules become more than communication advice. They become a way of reclaiming attention, because attention is one of the most valuable things you own. Whatever repeatedly captures your attention occupies part of your life. An argument that lasts 20 minutes but stays in your head for 3 days didn't cost you 20 minutes, it cost you 3 days of mental space. And the person you were arguing with may have paid almost nothing. Think about that. They may be sleeping peacefully while you're constructing paragraph number 14 in your head. That is an extraordinary imbalance of psychological cost. And it only ends when you stop believing that peace requires their agreement. Maybe they never understand. Maybe they never apologize. Maybe they tell the story differently forever. Maybe you never receive the sentence you wanted from them. Can you still move forward? That question is much more important than how do I make them understand? Because one question gives your peace a condition, the other gives you a choice. Here's something I want you to try tonight. Take the conversation you keep replaying and finish it without changing the other person. Don't imagine the perfect comeback. Don't imagine them apologizing. Don't imagine finally proving your point. Instead, imagine yourself saying, "I know what happened, I know what I meant, I've learned what I needed to learn, and I don't need this conversation to end differently in order for me to move forward." Then let the scene end. No victory, no humiliation, no final word, just an ending. Because sometimes closure isn't something another person gives you. It's the moment you stop demanding a different past, and once you understand that, stop explaining yourself takes on an entirely different meaning. It isn't only about what you stop saying to other people, it's also about what you finally stop rehearsing inside yourself. I want you to run an experiment for the next 24 hours, not for the rest of your life, just one day for 24 hours. Notice every moment you feel the urge to explain yourself when nobody actually asks for clarification. Don't suppress it, don't judge it, just notice it. Someone questions a decision you made, notice the urge. Someone doesn't respond the way you hoped, notice the urge. Someone looks disappointed when you say no, notice the urge. Someone misunderstands something you said, notice the urge. And before you respond, ask yourself one question: what am I trying to accomplish with my next sentence? Understanding, good, speak. Repair, good, speak. Necessary information, speak. An honest apology, absolutely speak. But if the answer is, I need them to stop being disappointed in me, pause. If the answer is, I need them to agree that I'm a good person, pause. If the answer is, I need to win, pause. If the answer is, I can't stand the possibility that they might misunderstand me, pause. That pause is the experiment. You don't even have to remain silent. You can still decide to speak. The point is that the sentence now comes after awareness instead of before it, and I want you to pay attention to something else, your body, because over-explaining isn't only a verbal habit, it's often physical. Your chest tightens, your breathing changes, your fingers move toward the phone, you begin typing before you've even decided whether you want to answer. Your body is trying to discharge uncertainty through communication, so interrupt the sequence, put the phone down, take one slow breath, wait 10 seconds, then read the message again. You may still want to respond. Fine, but now ask, can I say this in half as many words? That's where things become interesting. A 5-paragraph defense becomes 2 paragraphs. 2 paragraphs become 4 sentences. 4 sentences become 1, and sometimes the one sentence disappears entirely, not because you're playing games. Because after 10 seconds of distance, you realize it was never necessary. At the end of the 24 hours, ask yourself, how many explanations did I almost give that nobody actually needed? The number may surprise you, and if you want to make this experiment real, do one thing right now. Write this in the comments: I choose my response, not for me, for you. Because writing it creates a tiny commitment to notice the moment your next reaction tries to choose itself. 24 hours, that's all. Don't become colder. Don't become quieter, become more deliberate, because the goal of psychological strength is not to say less at all costs. It's to make sure that when you do speak, the words belong to you. There is a hidden cost to constantly explaining yourself, and it isn't just time. Every unnecessary explanation teaches your mind something. It teaches you that discomfort must be resolved immediately, that misunderstanding is dangerous, that disapproval requires correction, that another person's opinion of you is something you are responsible for managing. Repeat that pattern long enough, and you can become dependent on reassurance without realizing it. You make a decision. Then look around to see whether everyone approves. You set a boundary. Then soften it because somebody looks disappointed. You say no, then spend 5 minutes explaining why your no is reasonable. Eventually, you're not really making decisions anymore. You're submitting proposals and waiting for emotional approval. That's the deeper danger, because a boundary that requires another person's agreement isn't really a boundary. A decision that only feels valid after somebody approves it isn't fully yours. And an identity that collapses every time somebody misunderstands it isn't stable yet. Psychological strength develops when you can tolerate the space between "I know why I made this decision" and "they understand why I made this decision." Sometimes those two things will meet, sometimes they won't. You need to be able to survive both. Imagine two versions of yourself. The first walks into every difficult conversation thinking, "How do I make sure they understand me?" The second walks in thinking, "How do I communicate clearly, honestly, and respectfully?" Those sound similar. They're not. The first makes your success dependent on their reaction. The second makes your success dependent on your behavior. You control one, you don't control the other. That's the shift. Your responsibility is clarity, not control. Your responsibility is honesty, not universal agreement. Your responsibility is to listen when someone has something legitimate to say. Not to surrender your judgment every time someone dislikes your answer. And perhaps most importantly, your responsibility is to recognize when you were wrong, because none of this works if stop explaining yourself becomes an excuse to avoid accountability. Psychological strength isn't, "I never have to explain anything to anyone." That's arrogance. Sometimes you owe someone context. Sometimes your actions affected another person and they deserve an explanation. Sometimes you made a mistake. Sometimes the strongest sentence available to you is, "I was wrong," or "I understand why that hurt you," or "I should have handled that differently." Notice how little explanation those sentences require. Real accountability is often surprisingly concise. Excuses are usually much longer, so don't leave this video believing that strength means becoming impossible to question. That's not strength. That's fragility hiding behind certainty. The goal is something harder. To become a person who can hear legitimate criticism without collapsing, and reject illegitimate criticism without performing a 2-hour defense. To apologize without humiliating yourself. To disagree without becoming cruel. To be misunderstood without becoming obsessed. To speak when something matters, and stop when nothing useful remains to be said. That is what it means to stop explaining yourself intelligently. And once you reach that point, something changes in the way people experience you, not because you've learned a trick, not because you've become mysterious, but because they can feel that your center of gravity is no longer located inside their approval. Something interesting happens when you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. People notice, not because you announce that you've changed, not because you suddenly become cold, and not because you start ignoring everyone around you. They notice because the old pattern stops appearing. The person who could once provoke 5 paragraphs from you gets 5 sentences, then maybe 1. The person who expected you to immediately defend every decision. Here's, "I understand that you see it differently," and nothing else. The person who used disappointment to make you reconsider every boundary discovers that your kindness is still there, but your decision remains. At first, this can feel uncomfortable for them and for you because relationships develop patterns. One person pushes, the other explains. One person withdraws, the other chases. One person accuses, the other defends. Repeat a pattern long enough, and both people begin treating it as normal. So when one person changes their part, the entire dynamic has to adjust, and this is where you need to be careful. Don't turn your new restraint into a performance. Don't delay messages just to look powerful. Don't ignore people to create anxiety. Don't become vague because you want to seem mysterious. Don't use silence as punishment. That's not psychological strength. That's another form of dependence, because you're still organizing your behavior around their reaction. You're just doing it in reverse. Before, you explained because you wanted approval. Now you're silent because you want them to notice your silence. Either way, they are still controlling the behavior. Real change is quieter than that. You answer when an answer is useful. You don't when it isn't. You explain when clarity matters. You stop when you're repeating yourself. You apologize when you're wrong. You don't apologize simply because somebody dislikes your boundary. There is no performance, no game. No secret attempt to make someone miss you, chase you, fear you, or wonder about you. And that distinction matters, because the goal of this video was never to teach you how to become difficult to read. It was to teach you how to become difficult to control through your own reactions. Those are completely different things. One is a strategy aimed at other people. The other is self-command, and over time, something changes. Your sentences become cleaner. Your boundaries become calmer. Your apologies become more genuine because you're no longer apologizing for everything. Your yes means more because you're finally capable of saying no, and when you do explain yourself, people learn that there is probably a reason, because you no longer bury important explanations underneath hundreds of unnecessary ones. This is the paradox. When you stop explaining everything, the explanations you choose to give become more valuable. When you stop defending every part of yourself, your genuine defenses become clearer. When you stop fighting every battle, people can finally tell which battles actually matter to you, and perhaps most importantly, you begin to trust yourself, because every time you tolerate misunderstanding without abandoning your own judgment, you prove something to yourself. I can survive this feeling. I can survive somebody being disappointed. I can survive not having the final word. I can survive being misunderstood. And once your nervous system learns that, you no longer need another person's reaction to rescue you from the discomfort. That is where composure stops being something you perform and becomes something you actually possess. There is one sentence underneath everything we've talked about today, and if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this: I can be misunderstood without becoming unstable. Think about how much changes when you genuinely believe that. Someone disagrees with your decision, you remain steady. Someone questions your intentions, you listen, but you don't immediately panic. Someone doesn't like your boundary, you don't automatically remove it. Someone tells a story about you that you know isn't accurate. You decide whether correcting it actually matters, and sometimes you let it go, not because you're weak, not because you don't have an answer, but because you finally understood that having an answer doesn't mean you're obligated to give it. That distinction is psychological freedom. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to correct every inaccurate opinion. You don't have to defend every decision to people who were never responsible for making it. And you don't have to turn every misunderstanding into a courtroom. But remember the other side. Strength does not mean becoming unreachable. If someone you love comes to you honestly, listen. If you've hurt someone, take responsibility. If new information proves you wrong, change your mind. If an explanation can genuinely repair something valuable, give it. The goal isn't silence. The goal is choice. That's the thread connecting every rule in this video. Choice before reaction. Choice before explanation. Choice before defense. Choice before another message. Schopenhauer spent much of his philosophy examining the forces beneath human behavior, the desires and impulses that move us before reason arrives to explain them. And perhaps that's why his work still feels uncomfortable today, because intelligence alone doesn't free you from those forces. You can be brilliant and still be controlled by the need to be liked. You can be logical and still spend an entire night defending yourself to someone who stopped listening hours ago. You can win the argument and lose your peace. Psychological strength begins when intelligence stops serving every impulse that demands a response. When you can feel the urge, understand the urge, and still decide, no, not this time. And in that moment, you haven't defeated the other person. You've done something far more difficult. You've stopped allowing the moment to defeat you. Before we finish, remember what these 7 rules were really teaching you. Rule 1, not every misunderstanding requires another explanation. Sometimes you've already said enough. Rule 2, stop confusing approval with understanding. Someone can understand your decision perfectly and still dislike it. Rule 3, let people hold an incomplete version of you. You are responsible for your behavior, not every interpretation of it. Rule 4, create space between the trigger and the response, because the first emotion is information, not an instruction. Rule 5, never defend your entire character against a vague accusation. Move from labels to specific behavior. Rule 6, recognize when you're no longer arguing with information, but with identity. Some beliefs cannot be changed by another paragraph. And Rule 7, know when the conversation is finished. Even if the other person hasn't stopped talking. 7 rules, but they all lead to one transformation. You stop asking, how do I make them understand me? And you begin asking, how do I make sure my response represents me? That's the shift from control to self-command, from reaction to choice, from needing the last word to knowing your own position. And none of this requires you to become colder. In fact, the opposite can happen. You can listen more carefully because you're no longer preparing a defense against every sentence. You can apologize more sincerely because an apology no longer feels like the collapse of your identity. You can disagree more calmly because disagreement no longer feels like rejection. You can love people without requiring them to validate every decision you make. That's strength, not becoming emotionless, not becoming unreachable, not becoming the person who never explains anything, becoming the person who knows the difference between a conversation worth having and a reaction worth resisting. So the next time your phone lights up with the message that instantly changes your breathing, remember this moment. Don't start with the reply, start with the pause. Ask what the situation actually needs from you. Maybe it needs honesty, maybe an apology, maybe a boundary, maybe clarification, and sometimes it needs absolutely nothing. Then choose accordingly. Because once your response becomes a choice, the other person may still control what they say. They may still control what they believe. They may even control how they remember you, but they no longer control who you become in response. Schopenhauer spent much of his life misunderstood. He was difficult, pessimistic, often isolated. For years, his work received far less attention than he believed it deserved. He watched other philosophers become celebrated while many of his own ideas remained largely ignored, and yet he kept writing. He didn't need the room to agree with him before he continued thinking. There is something worth taking from that. Your life cannot become an endless campaign to control how every person interprets you. Some people will understand you, some won't. Some will see your boundaries as strength, others will call them selfish. Some will respect your silence, others will invent a story to fill it. Some will recognize your intentions, others may misunderstand them completely. You cannot control all of that, but you can control something far more important, whether their reaction determines your next move. That is the real lesson, not silence, not detachment, not becoming cold, self-command. The ability to explain yourself without begging to be believed, to apologize without surrendering your dignity, to listen without automatically submitting, to disagree without needing to destroy, and to walk away from a finished conversation without turning around for one final sentence. So when you leave this video, don't try to become someone who never explains themselves. Become someone who knows why they're explaining. That difference changes everything. And if one of these 7 rules describes something you've been doing for years, tell me which one in the comments. Just write the number 1 through 7. And if you want more psychology through the minds of Schopenhauer, Machiavelli, Nietzsche, Jung, and the thinkers who understood the darker patterns of human behavior long before modern social media gave them new names, subscribe because we're going much deeper. But before you go, remember this. You do not become psychologically strong when nobody can hurt you. You become psychologically strong when discomfort no longer automatically decides your behavior. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You don't need everyone to approve of you. And you certainly don't need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself well enough that when the pressure arrives, your response still belongs to you. Stop explaining, start choosing, and let your composure say the rest.